Hello everyone, welcome to my channel. Today we'll be talking about the fall of man and the beginning of human sin. God the Creator laid down but one command to Adam and Eve. They were not to eat the fruit of the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. If they ate the fruit, they would die. But Satan appeared to Eve in the form of a serpent and tempted her to eat the forbidden fruit. She yielded to the temptation, and Adam followed suit. Adam and Eve had committed the first human sin. They had rebelled against God. Discontented with being creatures made in the image of God, they wanted to be as God themselves. God would not turn his back on what had happened. As a just God and, as we will see, a loving God, he punished man and the woman. Paradise was lost, and the world took on many important characteristics similar to us. Perfect equality ended. Now the husband will rule his wife. Childbirth will be painful. Work will be tedious and difficult. Rather than leisurely picking fruit from the limbs of trees in a thriving garden, man would have to plow and plant in the ground that more easily grew weeds and thorns than food. Man's greatest punishment was to be driven from the garden and from the fruit of the tree of eternal life. Henceforth, men would die. From this original source of sin has flowed a story of crimes and tears, the actual world history we have known. All who have lived have also sinned. The work of evil has continued, and Satan's power through temptation has grown. In the beginning there was perfection. Since the beginning, man has fallen to ever greater depths of rebellion against God. A different story of the beginning, the history of evolution. The extreme of man's rebellion against God is the denial of the Bible's teaching that God is the creator of man. According to the story of evolution, man was not created directly by God, but instead evolved from the animals. Evolutionists say that at some point in history, certain animals began accidentally changing in ways that eventually produced a man. This idea has many weaknesses, however. It cannot explain the beginning of world history, and it gives a false impression of man. Logic's traps for evolution. We have seen that man differs from animals, and that man possesses language and thought. Anyone who believes that man evolved from animals must explain how language and reason began. But such an explanation cannot be given, for it is a question of chickens and eggs, which came first. Human thought requires language. Much of our thinking is in words. When we think, it is as if we listen to ourselves talk inside our heads. Language, on the other hand, requires thought. Unless there is thought behind the sounds of called language or speech, what comes out is more gibberish. What came first, language or thought? Without language and the ability to communicate with one another, there would not be no truly human society. Instead of a society, we would have a mere herd or swarm. But language and communication assumes men living together in society. Which came first, society or language? Genesis, of course, did not have these problems of logic. It presents man as the direct creation of God, and from every first having of all three, language, thought, and society. Evolution, humanism, and the destruction of man. The evolutionist's only escape from logic is to downplay man's special characteristics. Thus, he will underrate man's speech and reason. As for language, the evolutionist will say that the animals have it, or at least something very close. Thought, he says, is really nothing more than a process of electricity and chemistry. The evolutionists will also attack man's awareness of the difference in between right and wrong and man's freedom to choose. For he cannot explain the evolution of these characteristics. The awareness of right and wrong is just something we learn, he says, not something we're born with. And man's freedom to choose is not just an illusion. To an evolutionist, man is really nothing more than a computer made of flesh and bone, and not a very fast one at that. Do you begin to see the consequences of rebelling against God? Do you begin to see the result of humanism, putting man in place of or above God? Not God, but man is hurt. When man tries to be God, he only succeeds in making himself like an animal or a machine. The Bible's account of the beginning elevates God. It also elevates man, but not at God's expense. Humanism, whether in the degrees of evolution, or some other view tries to build man up by downplaying or ignoring God. It rebels against God but utterly destroys man by making him no different from an animal or a machine. Well, that's all I have for today, but here is a question for you, just for you to think about. What was the first human sin, and what effect did it have on world history? Well, like I said before, that's all I have for today. So, thank you for listening for Cloudy Bear Studies, where you can learn to study.